Hello, everyone. My name is John Beckert. I'm president of Forward Janesville. I'd like to welcome you to Forward Janesville's weekly all-member conference call. And my first thought is something you're going to hear me say multiple times, but I think it's important. If you have a question now, or if you have a question after you hear some comments from our speakers, email that question to forward@forwardjanesville.com. That's forward@forwardjanesville.com. And a staff member will shuttle those questions into me, so during the Q&A, I will be able to ask your question. If at the end we have more questions and we have time, we're still going to make an effort to get those questions answered. What we've done is we've created a section of our website. It's basically a frequently asked questions section, and we'll hand off those questions perhaps to our panelists, or if it's a little outside the bounds there, we'll find an expert in that field, and we'll try to get those questions answered and put up on our website, and hopefully you will go there and find them. The other thing I want to mention is if you're on this call and you're not getting our weekly online Pulse newsletter, which comes out on Wednesdays or Thursdays, and you'd like to, please email forward@forwardjanesville.com and say, I'd like to be put on your Pulse mailing list. That is essentially a compendium of the things that are going on in Forward Janesville. We try to highlight good news stories. We're trying to keep some normalcy to our business lives by not always focusing this particular piece on what's going on with COVID-19. On the other hand, we recognize how important all the things are related to COVID-19, and we have created a separate Friday COVID-19 digest where Dan and others in our staff and outside experts are offering up answers to typical questions, resources, places that you can go to read up on a variety of topics. And that is all part of the Friday COVID-19 digest that Forward Janesville puts out. Again, if you're not getting it, all you have to do is nudge us at forward@forwardjanesville.com, and we will put you on that list. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our panelists, all three of them, and then we'll turn to our first presenter after I've introduced all of them. Rhonda Suda is CEO of the Southwest Workforce Development Board. She's going to talk about the variety of services that the Workforce Development Board offers to individuals and businesses. Gail Price, of course, is the Economic Development Director of the City of Janesville, and I'm really interested to hear what he's hearing about the local business community, and I'd like to I'd like for him to provide his perspective on how the city and the businesses that he's interacting with are responding to the crisis. And then finally, of course, Dan Cunningham, Forward Janesville's Vice President of Government Affairs, is going to fill in with the latest and greatest news from federal, state, and local government, public policy, and stories from the front line, if you will. So with that, I'm going to start with Rhonda. Rhonda, if you would take the microphone and give us 5 to 10 minutes about the Southwest Workforce Development Board and the work you and your staff are doing. Rhonda?
Thank you, John. I appreciate the time to talk about workforce development activities during this unique crisis that we're all going through. It seems like everything is changing daily, and now in particular in Wisconsin, we definitely have our own challenges. But I want to start out the conversation to kind of let you know what unemployment is at right now and what my interaction has been with the Department of Workforce Development to be able to share some numbers and hopefully some even better or newer numbers as the week progresses. So in general, the Department of Workforce Development, who administrates unemployment in the state of Wisconsin, is supposed to be releasing unemployment numbers by city sometime this week. Normally, this type of information doesn't come to the local areas or counties until about 6 weeks after a month is closed, but they are trying to recognize that local business and our local officials would like to see these numbers as early as possible. So the numbers that they'll release, I would say that they are as accurate as they can be at the time. And as soon as I get them, I'll be forward them on to different partners, and we'll be releasing them also on our website. To follow up on that, the Department of Workforce Development has also released local UI contact numbers. This is trying to offset the volume that they're getting at the state. And for those that are interested, if you are an employer or a job seeker and you do have a question, struggling to get through whether it's online or through the 1-800 numbers, the local UI contact number is 608-901-5700. Also, I wanted to report that there are definitely a significant number of jobs out there related to staffing essential businesses, and they can be also found on the jobcenterwisconsin.org website, anywhere from social assistance to healthcare, janitorial, distribution, warehousing. They're all, places are still hiring. I don't find this to be unusual because we were definitely in a job seeker market at the time that this crisis hit, and the need for workers is still incredibly strong. It's just that it's taken a different path, I think, than what we were all expecting. So to give you an idea on the claims that are hitting the state of Wisconsin right now, for the week that ended the 28th of March, there was 115,679 new claims for that week. Also during that week, there was 1.5 million phone calls, which was about a 6,200% increase. In general, that averages out to be about 160 calls per second that was coming into the system. You know, I probably don't have to say it, but the system was not prepared for that. The system in Wisconsin is relatively robust, but it is also a complicated system if you are a claimant. For example, it will kick out anybody that works in Wisconsin but has a non-Wisconsin ID, making those individuals have to call. It's not right now set up to handle all of the CARES changes that came with the new legislation, but they are working on their system to incorporate unemployment for self-employed. They're working on the system to incorporate the added incentive or the added monetary amounts, the $600 that are unemployed will receive over and above their standard unemployment if they've been laid off because of COVID-19. So those are some changes that are going on and in regard to unemployment and what they're trying to incorporate into their software. The Department of Workforce Development is also training an additional 40 staff from other agencies in the state to handle the unemployment influx. That does require some training, but that happened last week. So, you know, there is some type of effect, a positive effect that is going on with that. They're also trying to return calls within 3 days so people don't have to stay on the line. They can just leave a message, and their goal is to have those calls returned within 3 days. So, as I mentioned, there are still several businesses hiring, which is good. A lot of people are finding, that in normal unemployment, an individual has to work a certain amount of time in the state of Wisconsin, has to be let go for a reason that's outside of their control, and have had to have a certain amount of earnings. So, with the legislation that passed at the federal level, a lot of these limits are being waived at this time, and unemployment benefits are opened up to a whole new group of people, at least as it relates to this crisis. From a workforce board organization perspective, I wanted to provide just a few updates of what we're doing. We have a leased employee program that primarily works with nonprofits and municipalities to provide them a temporary workforce or a long-term project type of workforce. We are seeing a slight increase in that, where counties are finding that they do have to bring on some additional people or replacement staff because of this crisis. And so we have seen an uptick in that program in our organization. We are continuing to hold rapid response sessions, which are all done virtually. This would be to work with job seekers and employers who are laying off individuals, whether or not it's temporary or not. but those sessions are meant to provide information on the workforce development system, unemployment, job opportunities, and the programs that somebody might be eligible for through the local workforce boards and job centers. We are still enrolling participants in most of our programs, and our participants are finding employment in businesses that are deemed essential. We were not initially expecting this, but given, like I said, given our tight employment market that we had, I'm not really surprised. So in conjunction with the other 10 workforce boards throughout the state, we're submitting a national emergency disaster grant with the state to the Department of Labor. And these funds would be used to lessen the impact of the crisis through paid activity such as sanitation efforts, community cleanup, et cetera. This would not be funds, these funds wouldn't directly go to the activity itself, except that it would offset the wages of the individuals that are engaged in those programs if those individuals were dislocated workers because of COVID-19. I'm sorry, it can get very confusing. I'm trying to state it how Department of Labor has stated. A lot of times I think whenever we're talking about our federal entities, they're never quite as straightforward as we'd like them to be. But we are trying to have some options available for when we start to get back on our feet after this. We know that there's going to be some type of, whether it's hazard control or it's cleanup, sanitation, that is going to have to go on primarily, I think, to make sure all of us feel better being back into the real world. We are also working on a grant that is going to assist individuals that are coming out of prisons in our local jails with workforce services. That grant application will be submitted on April 15th. And primarily when we're working with our business customers, or small business customers especially, we try to refer them to the small business development centers, primarily because they are the experts in regard to the assistance that is available through CARES. And we'd rather see individuals funneled that way, to our economic development partners and our local chambers for that type of employer assistance because we're not involved in that grant-making process. Our services to employers, such as on-the-job training, customized training, and incumbent worker training, are still available, but they're not being used simply because they're not extremely relevant at this point, but they are available. If any employers want to contact us about those opportunities, of course, we would definitely love to talk with you. So in a nutshell, that's kind of my brief report on what's going on with us. My whole team is working from home. We're all connected virtually and do a lot of conference calls, a lot of phone calls, and a lot of go-to meetings. So if anybody needs to get a hold of us that are struggling, I just please reach out to me. John has my immediate contact information, and my phone is always on.
Thank you, Rhonda. Excellent. Excellent start to this conference call, and I'm sure there will be questions for you in a few moments. We're going to move now to Gail Price, the Economic Development Director for the City of Janesville. Gail, thank you for joining us, and please give us your perspective on what you're seeing.
Well, thank you, John. Appreciate the time today and being on this call. So as you can imagine, kind of tying in with what Rhonda was talking about, we are seeing some businesses that are doing very strong and basically being able to weather this storm. And those are typically those businesses that are, essential, tied to other essential activities. So our manufacturing, from what I'm hearing, is they're doing well. Some companies are retooling and making products that address specific needs within the country right now. When we talk to our distribution companies, the majority of those are doing okay. When we think about distribution, the ones that are maybe having a little more of a struggle are those that are tied to the food service activities, and it's just not as strong where the restaurants are not having the same amount of sales. as they would if they were fully open and operational for people to sit down. As we've talked to some of the restaurant companies in the area, from what we're seeing is the locally owned are finding some focus on the takeout and carry out. They're seeing some cash flow there, but certainly not what they would be seeing if they were fully open. The groceries are doing well. You can see that all the time with the full parking lots. People are heading back into the groceries, and they're shifting a lot of that expenditure on food that would have been pre-made or pick up or sit down in a restaurant, and they're making more meals at home. So it's kind of interesting on a national level. There's been a huge spike in pre-made foods consumption where that had been falling out of favor. So as people are cooped up at home longer, they're making that shift, trying to make it a little easier on themselves as they go forward and spending more time at home. As we can all imagine, the retailers that are really kind of being hit the hardest here. Some are experimenting with online sales, but as people continue to hear about and discuss this pandemic and being at home more, they're typically pulling back. Certainly, we're hoping that when the Fed starts sending checks to people here in the next couple of weeks, that those monies will be redirected towards expenditures, and people are maybe catching up on things that they need as they move forward. One of the things we've talked to a number of landlords, and a lot of the concern about the SBA programs out there are that there's really no net for the landlords, and that's both on the apartment side and on the commercial retail side. So as we have businesses and owners apply for the SBA loans and receive those, it's going to be very important to for people to continue to pay their rent and not create a gap in the system here that the landlords never get a chance to catch up. That's certainly a long-term concern as we move forward. So when we think about what the city's doing, we have our emergency operations center that's open and operating, and we're positioning ourselves for what's anticipated to be an influx of cases. We identified very early on that recovery was going to be very important to the business community. So we made a conscious decision to pull myself out of the emergency center and have my staff focus on the various programs and getting a place out there where people can find information, much like the Forward Janesville page where you've got it all bulleted out. We are doing the same thing. And, if you could just get overwhelmed with the amount of information that's out there right now, and having a place where you got one spot to get it and that it's trustable information is great. The SBA PPP programs, that's a great program, but I think one of the challenges is, do the banks have enough bandwidth to be able to help people get through that process, as those are not directly through SBA, it's through an SBA lending institution. One of the things that my staff is doing is we've got the list of SBA lenders. We're trying to help direct those business owners that don't have a relationship with one of those institutions to one of the institutions that can help them. So certainly encourage people to call the Economic Development Office. We'll be glad to help you with that and to get you connected with somebody that can provide that loan. One of the other things that we've mentioned out there, and we want to continue to emphasize, the Economic Development Office is a resource that people can talk to. One of the things that we do, not a lot of, but I think we're going to be doing more of is more of this business coaching and how to strategize, helping businesses through this time, however that may be. So the toolkit that Forward Janesville sent out last week is a great piece.
Hello, we seem to have lost you, Gail. Well, I don't know what to say except that we'll try to get Gail back. Dan, are you on the line?
I am indeed.
I think the only option right now is to throw the ball into your court and hope that we don't lose you.
Okay.
So, Dan, if you would give us your update.
Love to. Thank you, John. Glad to talk to you all again. It's a sign of the times. I think my wife has a conference call. I have a conference call. My 14-year-old has a conference call, and my 6-year-old is running around as we speak. So if you hear footsteps in the background, that's what that is. But, and we've all had issues with technology in these conference calls and everything. It's a brave new world. So hopefully you can hear me loud and clear, and glad to give another update. The Paycheck Protection Program, just want to build on what some of what Gail was saying. As you all know, this program, the SBA's $350 billion program for forgivable payroll loans, went live last week. Now, not surprisingly, there have been some hiccups within the SBA's infrastructure. In fact, I've heard the words train wreck several times when referring to the SBA's system. Their system crashed yesterday, and several banks are having issues accessing the SBA's electronic portal, which is known as eTran. So that's issue number one. The SBA needs to get its technology up and running when it comes to this program. Issue number two is that the SBA really needs to provide some additional guidance on the program, including what documents banks will use to close transactions. So we've heard that even if a bank has an approval to lend money, it's difficult for them to close those loans and disperse the funds. So that's certainly an issue as well. So none of this is terribly surprising given the size and ambition of the program. I do believe the SBA will get things right, but it's going to take some time. They are under tremendous, tremendous pressure. We've reached out to our legislators and told them about all the problems the banks are having, and the legislators are contacting the SBA. Everybody's contacting the SBA. So they will get it right, but they're under a lot of heat right now. And naturally, businesses are starting to get worried that the program money is going to run out before they get an opportunity to apply. So a $350 billion program, I heard that in day one, by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that somewhere in the order of $900 million worth of applications had already been submitted. So this is the kind of demand we're talking about. However, I am less worried about that, frankly. Even if the program runs out of money, Congress is prepared to step in and replenish the program at a moment's notice. There is 100% bipartisan agreement on that. I've heard that the Treasury Secretary, even today, said they're going to put $200 billion more into the program. So don't worry about that part as much. Let's just try to be patient. Let the SBA get their stuff going and go from there. All I can say to frustrated businesses at this point is, again, try to be patient. Hold on for as long as you can. The government's always had an issue with over-promising and under-delivering. But I do believe they will get this right. So, and I will say, we've talked to a lot of our local financial institutions. They are working 24/7 to help people navigate these troubled waters. So give them time, give them patience as well. We will get this thing figured out. So keep the faith. As for paid sick leave and family programs, several of you have reached out with concerns about these programs, how to pay for them, logistics, things like that. As you probably know, businesses are expected to front the cost for these programs and will then be paid back through tax credits that will be received when you file your 2020 taxes. So there's a gap there, right? So the government's offering two solutions to this. Really, the first one is the Paycheck Protection Program, frankly, where that's going to help businesses achieve the liquidity they need to hopefully cover these additional costs. And the Department of Labor is granting hardship exemptions for businesses under 50 employees. This exemption will be available for a couple different reasons, but basically, if providing these benefits is going to cause your business to stop operation, you're going to get a hardship extension. Now, I'm not 100% yet with how lenient the Department of Labor will be in granting these exemptions, things like that, and how a business can apply for one. But if you are having a hard time, if you think you could qualify for this hardship extension, get a hold of me, Dan C. at forwardjanesville.com, and let me help you through the process. You know, as we move from the hypothetical to the actual on some of this legislation, we're starting to get a lot of questions. As you implement this stuff in the real world, lots of interesting questions have come up. For example, I talked to a member this morning about they're an essential business. They have workers now they have plenty of work to do, fortunately for them, but now they have workers who don't want to come to work because of the virus. They're afraid, and they've asked to be laid off so they can draw unemployment benefits. So what do you do in a case like that? I don't have all those answers, but you know what? I am plugged in to a lot of different people, and I can get those answers. I want all of your questions. I'm serious. Email me, danc at forwardjanesville.com, and I will answer the questions as quickly as I possibly can. But I want to help, so we want to be a resource for you. Real quickly wanted to touch on the state response to the pandemic. There's been a lot of activity in state government in the last few days. Really, a lot of it's been related to our on-again, off-again election. So the election is on, as you may have heard. So go vote today if you feel you can do so safely. Many precautions are being taken. If you have questions about what to do, where to vote, things like that, there is a fabulous website. It's called My Vote Wisconsin. The URL is myvote.wi.gov, and it has amazing information, and it's really up to the minute. I popped on today. I voted absentee, but I wanted to see where I would vote if I was voting in person today, and it just put in my address, popped return, and boom, I'm voting over at the old Sears store at the mall. So go to myvotewisconsin.gov and find out information. You can also call the city clerk's office at 755-3070. So that's the election. We'll see how it goes. I think you'll get results for the election maybe a week from now because of all the large number of absentee ballots that were submitted. So, be patient with that stuff too. Meanwhile, there are some competing proposals out there. Governor Evers has a set of legislative proposals in response to the pandemic. WMC, the State Chamber of Commerce, has their recommendations. All sorts of organizations have their recommendations about what to do in the wake of this. But as I said last week, I really do feel like a lot of these legislative measures are sort of crack fillers when it comes to the federal stuff. Where did the gaps come in from the federal legislation? How to fill those gaps? It's all hypothetical at this point. There's just a set of competing proposals. So I'm not going to go into the details of them until I've got something real to report on that. So if you have questions about that, hit me up at danc at forwardjanesville.com. Last but certainly not least, I wanted to answer as best I could the burning question on everybody's mind based on what I'm hearing. I've spent the last 3 weeks on conference calls with state and national leaders pretty much every day. Most of these calls end with everyone's burning question: how and when does all of this end? And there really is no easy answer to that question, but the consensus view that I'm hearing is the country is going to reopen on a piecemeal basis, so piece by piece, right? There's not going to be any sort of grand reopening or a date when we all sort of go back to normal. And the question of when the piecemeal opening starts up again really depends on how the virus plays out, when various states reach their peak, the seasonal aspect of the virus, things like that. So a lot of it is unknown, really, and everybody wants this answer, but there really isn't a great one, frankly. All we can do at this point is hope that these dramatic steps that the government has taken will do what they're supposed to do, that they will, save our economy. And until the day we get back to normal, I hope that you all take care of yourself, your family, your friends, and the community. And I got to say, I can't wait to see all of you again in person. and I will never, ever take that again for granted. So thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. And like I said, I want all your questions at danc@forwardzanesville.com. I'll turn it back.
Thank you, Dan. Excellent, excellent, excellent. I understand, I have it on good authority, that Gail Price is back with us. Is that right, Gail?
Yes, John. Thank you. Apparently, I need a new cell phone provider here, so hopefully it will not cut me off again. Just kind of summarize kind of where the city and the economic development office is. We're a resource, and we are available. We'll help people talk through what this can look like. To be honest, we've been reaching out to companies. We've reached out to companies that we knew might be able to fill a specific need in the community. So as one example, we've got a company now making hand sanitizer for hospitals and other counties on an emergency operations basis. So, as we continue to think that through, we can connect people up with those opportunities. And certainly I think there are a lot of them out there, considering all the discussion we hear about lack of PPE and things like that. So certainly think of the city as a resource. I'm happy to follow up and talk to any of the businesses out there. You can reach me at priceg@ci.janesville.wi.us or give me a call at 608-755-3059. And again, we'll be happy to assist. One last note, I would like for businesses to fill out the economic disruption survey that we have that available on our website. I know Forward Janesville is going to be sending a link out to that here later this week. And it's vitally important, because when we think about what Dan was just talking about, where are the gaps in the legislation, the survey is going to provide us enough information, or at least the state information, as to where those gaps are and how additional programs that they may roll out or could be rolled out locally could be designed to help more specific needs where the other legislation created a gap. So it's a very simple survey. It probably takes 5 to 8 minutes at most, and it's really just getting at what does it look like for impact for your business, how has it been affected by the supply chain versus the sales side of things. And, again, that's going to be really good information for the state to know for additional programs and if they make a federal ask for additional assistance. So I encourage you to take a few minutes for that survey. As much data as we can get is really going to help drive the future recovery from this thing. And at that point, yes, thank you.
I think it's important that you and Dan and Rhonda have all said the same thing, which is if you have questions, follow up and we'll get you answers. There's just sort of a whole mindset here with all the providers and all the people who are involved in community development that we want to help. We really do want to help. So with that in mind, let's get into some questions. This first one, I think, Rhonda, is probably in your lane, and it comes from a local employer who's desperate to hire more workers. Makes it kind of interesting. The question is, I understand federal unemployment of $600 per week will be added to the Wisconsin unemployment numbers. The max weekly payment is now $970 versus where it used to be at $370. With those two incentives, how can we be expected to attract employees? Can you explain the logic behind that question a little bit first, and then do your best to answer it?
Thanks for these ones. So one of the things, and I don't have my calculator necessarily in front of me right now. The $600 payment is, I think hindsight says, okay, so what was the brain trust that kind of put all of this together? And I think everybody was reacting or let's say Washington, D.C. reacted as this was a crisis, this was an emergency, this was urgent. But then I think that there are some things that we would say, afterwards. This was important, but it probably wasn't urgent to the extent of the work that they did with the 600, because that doesn't necessarily, most of us would say, that doesn't incentivize people to get back into the workforce. Overall, from the people that we've dealt with when we're doing our rapid response sessions and we're dealing with job seekers, the impression that we get is that they really want to be back to work. They really want to, want their kids to get back in school. They want that new normal. And I don't necessarily know if that extra 600 would keep them home, but the fact that they're fearful of the safety of working around others would. There's that. But, one of the interesting things that in Southeast, so our counterparts, the Southeast Wisconsin Workforce Development Board, their business services team reported out last week that there was a food processor distributor out there, and kind of running into that same question, I'm desperately needed people, what can I do? And what they decided to do is there were two smaller distribution sites that were laying off people, and they actually are borrowing their workforce to work at this, or that workforce to work at this larger site. So the lawyers, of course, attorneys always get involved, and they came up with some type of contract or agreement that for this period of time, will employ, your people with us, and they'll keep their same benefits. And I don't know if there's any added money or anything else like that. We all, some of the things that I kind of want to remind everybody of, and we've done this consistently for at least probably the last 5 years, that we all knew, right, a labor market shortage was coming. We all knew that the job seeker, that person that is either looking for a job or looking for a new job to change into, we all knew that they held the basket of goods. In the paradigm between employee and employer and workforce, it was now a job seeker market. That has come especially to light during this. So if you're an employer and you're desperate for workforce, whether it is through this crisis or it's through an on back to our normal when we get there, I think the question you have to ask yourself first is, if I was sitting at home collecting $900 a week or whatever that benefit would be, what would make me want to come and work for you? And it's not necessarily a fun question, but again, we were running out of people before this crisis came, and when this crisis is over and done with, and hopefully we won't see extreme differences in our available population, we're still going to have that same crisis. We're still going to be a society of consumers. It's just getting us through that. And I wish I had, some better examples, but I think when it comes down to any recruiting effort, every employer, whether it's in the crisis or not, that one of your primary human resources goals is to say, how do I convince people to come and work for me, or what do I have to offer to make myself more competitive versus my my competition? What is my competitive advantage in the human asset market? And probably not necessarily what you maybe wanted to hear, but in this sense, unless the federal government changes that, and I doubt that they will, I think that was probably something that helped balance out the business awards versus the your regular worker awards in the CARES Act. If there's another employer that you work with that is laid off, to bring those, to negotiate like the one companies or the few companies in Southeast Wisconsin are doing. That may prove to be fruitful. I think, again, depending upon your organization, in general, I say that, everybody can always work smarter. And usually, there's always 20% more that we can get out of somebody, not in regard to hours, but in regard to working smart. And is there a way to incentivize your workforce that you currently have to give you 20% more?
Thank you. The next question is probably in Gail's lane. It's kind of an interesting one, I think. It says, there's a barstool rumor that a company was looking at the old GM site. And I know you can't speak to specifics of confidential projects, but more generally, are companies still looking to build new facilities in this kind of environment, Gail?
Yeah, so honestly, yes. And, it may be very surprising to some that anyone's looking, but we are working with a potential prospect at part of the GM site. We've had conversations about other buildings being built in the Southside Industrial Park, and it's true. There are people still looking. So we're certainly fostering those relationships as we move forward and hope to get some new projects to the finish line here probably in the early summer.
Thanks, Gail. I guess the other question that might be in your category is there were several large construction projects underway around the community. Is there, and I drive by one of them next to your office almost every day. Is there any indication that there's any slowdown or any change in the plans as it relates to those large projects?
No, those projects remain on schedule. We're very thankful that the governor has deemed construction essential. And they, all those projects, or a majority of those projects, have some kind of timeline that they do need to meet. So they're moving forward, and the spring is seemingly cooperating with that. So that is very good. So on those construction projects, they're doing their best to adhere to social distancing and protecting their workforce, and they're moving forward. So we're very thankful for that.
Yeah, I think the whole community is encouraged when they see buildings going up and work still being done. We describe it as a lockdown shutdown, but of course there's still a lot of activity. I think going around the horn, companies like Print, I mean, they are going full steam ahead, and I know the distribution centers and the food processing companies, they're all real busy. So it's a mixed bag when you look at the business community. I try to make a couple of calls every day to companies to find out, okay, what's your prospects? Sometimes it's hard to get a hold of people, to be honest with you, because they're really busy, or they are in a kind of a semi-shutdown mode. I have one more question for you, Rhonda, and I think it's one that might have been somewhat answered, but it's, I think, central to a lot of employers, and that is, what advice you give employers when they have to lay employees, lay them off, and they are asking them to please consider coming back at some point in time, but what advice would you give that employer?
So the best advice that we've given out, and we've given it out pretty consistently, is when you do have to lay off, whether decide whether you see that layoff as permanent or temporary. That's the first question you have to ask yourself. And if you think it's temporary, but it ends up to be permanent, that's okay. So right now, anybody who gets laid off because of COVID-19 does not have to perform work searches, because the expectation is that they're going to go back to their job. But you have to be able to tell, there's a list on our website of make sure you tell your employees that, of course, sorry that this happened. We want to have you back. This is outside of our control. But here's our first date that we expect to have you back. Here's how you file for unemployment online. Here's the local workforce development numbers. Here are the state unemployment numbers. And really try to encourage them during a time that, they're going to be struggling with. And the other thing I tell everybody I talk to is that we all pay taxes, and there are services out there, whether it is to get their family on Badger Care or it is get them receiving food share. And if there is a moment in your life where you ever feel like you have to access public benefits, now is the time to do it. Again, the application process for both of those are online, but it's a single site. And applying means nothing. The state can still come back and say you're not eligible, but we've all been told before, and I encourage people to do that for their own security. And if I was an employer, I personally have not had to lay off anybody yet, but it's out there, and that is what I would do. And again, I think as was shared in this conversation we had today, there are a lot of jobs that are out there. And if you felt strongly about a career move, it could be a great opportunity for them also.
All right, thank you. That's I think excellent advice to a lot of small businesses, even large businesses. I think there's a compassionate group of employers that hate this idea of having to let their coveted and valuable employees go. But of course, circumstances get overwhelming sometimes, and that's the only choice you have. We're actually at that point where we're out of questions, so I'm going to wind this call up a little bit early. I want to thank both of you again, and of course, Dan, thanks for calling in from home. The Forward Janesville staff is all working. Some have suggested, I suppose you just shut down. No, actually, everybody is working and working long hours, quite frankly, and we're available to help you, answer your questions, and provide you with quality information on an ongoing basis. So with that, I thank everybody for joining us. Again, one more time to our panelists, and as is fond of saying, stay at home, stay safe, and do your best to protect your family. Thanks for calling in. Bye.